All right, guys, welcome back. Kit here of Burn 1, the Shadowverse Evolved channel, bringing you another video, well, tier list video, that is. I'm joined here with my good buddy, Shepard. Want to say hi?
What's up, everybody? This is Shepard.
All right. Unfortunately, I'm not joined with Dean or Skaz or Presha. A lot of stuff going on. I just want to get this video done for you guys. So I'm here with Shepard. We're going to bang it out tonight, and then hopefully this will be up this week.
Kit boldly said, "Who's the fifth worst player I know?" All right, Shepard.
Oh wow, you feel very highly of yourself then.
the fifth worst. Whoa.
Oh
He's
man.
like, oh man, nobody else is online on a Monday night. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, why does everyone have lives? All right. I guess we'll kind of jump into this. Well, actually, you've never been on one of our tier listings. I don't know. Have you watched any of our tier list videos?
Just for the sake of the viewer, let's explain it to them from the top.
Okay, so tier 1 basically are like the huge meta decks, like they're the defining decks of the format. You'll probably find them always in top 8 and won't be surprised to see them winning like an event. Tier 1.5 is kind of that deck in between. If it draws super well, it's a tier 1 deck. If it draws poorly, it's a tier 2 deck, but it's still really good. It can compete with tier 1 and tier 2, and if it wins an event, it's not too surprising. Tier 2 is like kind of like the roguish type of decks where you can occasionally see them in top 8, and maybe they'll squeeze out a win and like in a big event. And then tier 3 is just the keep that stuff at locals, please. Unless you're playing against us at a big regional, then play all the tier 3 decks you want. That kind of
Awesome.
wraps up the tiers, or at least how we kind of gauge them. We can just get right into this. How do you want to start this? You want to just start from left to right, or do you want to just pull things around? What?
Yeah, let's just do left to right. That way we have a nice even distribution.
Okay. All right, first thing up here is Control. I was going to say Rune. Oh my God, Control Haven. It got some pretty decent stuff this time around. It has a really good 7-drop, things like that. But personally, I haven't been too impressed with it as much as I love playing Control Haven. I kind of feel like this is like I want to say like low tier 2 type of situation. I don't know how you feel.
Yeah, I feel like honestly, even potentially tier 3. I just need to see more to put it into tier 2. Like the biggest red flag for me with Control Haven / Aegis this set is that Skaz, who you guys might have seen in the set review videos for set 4, he's a really good control player. He's like the expert on this deck, and I know that he's been feeling frustrated with the way that it feels in set 4. So I think maybe if it had some more time to develop, I could see it go somewhere. But right now it feels like it just didn't get the same power boost that everything else got.
Yeah, I agree. Like you said, Skaz is a monster of a control player, and if he's moving on to other stuff, you probably should too. I'm gonna, honestly, I want to put this in tier 2, but I think we should throw it up into tier 3, right?
I really want to see it prove me wrong. I think the problem is that it is going to be the best tier 3 deck. I think everything else in tier 3 is going to be mostly like locals nonsense. I think you're going to see this show up in at least one major top 8.
Yeah, I could totally see it. I also can see people just not caring because everyone's too busy cracking their eggs.
That's true.
Yeah. All right. Next on here, we said this was like Aggro Abyss, right?
Yeah.
So the more I think about it, like, did Aggro Abyss even get too much in this set at all? They only got this guitar guy, basically, right? If you really want to play it. Was there anything else you noticed really good?
I mean, they can play some of the other stuff like the Punk Devil.
Mm. Yeah, but that was last. That was last.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Sorry, I was thinking of it because it's like now I've actually seen a lot more Abyss around. Yeah, I don't know. Aggro Abyss is this deck that I always just see floating around, and it's like I think it's never not been tier 2, if not tier 3. Like I just don't think it has the power to get there. Like sometimes it's gonna draw the perfect hand, and it's gonna like
pop off,
just run over your opponent. But in general, I don't think it has consistent power.
Yeah, I agree. It's draw tools too are always the most frustrating ones because not only are you like wasting board by cracking something with your soul conversion to draw cards, so you're like always required to like use 2 cards to draw extra cards. It hardly has any really search or consistency tools in that sense. The only thing I really like is sometimes I do see lists occasionally play like hand rip cards, and sometimes if you're at the hit at the right moment with your crazy executioner, like that could win you the game. But outside of that, I just feel it's like inconsistent, and you're a slave to the draw of the deck, basically, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that, and I think as somebody who values like if you have to fight back against the variance over a 5-round tournament, I just want to play decks like even Hero Sword has so many more lines to kind of save you from yourself than Aggro Abyss.
Yeah, I hard agree. I kind of want to throw this in tier 3. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I would say tier 3. I think what we're going to see is Aegis is probably going to stay at the top of tier 3.
Yeah,
I don't know if you do order tiers here or not.
I try to. Yeah. So I do
So yeah,
think Age
I
is
would
gonna
just
be at the
follow.
top. Yeah. All right, we have Fabled Forest. I'll give you the floor because I think you're the resident Fabled Forest player. You grinded the deck into dust, so
Yeah, I grinded the deck into dust, and I didn't play during the release of Uma. So in set 3, when I came back, I basically for a month straight played only Fable Forest. Tried to master the deck, play every version of it I could, and honestly, it was one of my greatest regrets was taking it to the Texas regional because after that regional, I just looked back and I said the problem was not that I needed to keep getting better at this deck. The problem is this deck wasn't powerful enough, and that was last set. Like I think it was a mistake to play it last set. I think this set, the only real thing you do now is you can add King Elephant to the deck, so you have more reach, and then you can add Cassiopeia because you fill your EX zone. But compared to the other deck that we'll talk about in a bit that Forest can do, I just don't see why you would ever bring this to an event. It's worse as a mid-range deck, it's worse as an aggro deck, and it's worse as a control deck than just normal Elephant Forest.
I agree across the whole board. I played the deck recently, at least the version you built during the set 3 meta and locally, and I like even though I was winning at games occasionally here and there, it just never felt great. And like even like maybe you could say that was like player skill diff there, but it still felt pretty bad. Um, I'm not exactly sure where you think in placing this. You placed in this tier 3, like below
Tier
Aegis.
3. I think this is the worst deck we've talked about. I think this is worse than Abyss.
Worse than Abyss? Okay.
But
I'll let
I'm
you.
biased because it is. I know it's not actually how these things work, but it definitely feels worse that it is such a downgrade compared to the other Forest deck. It feels like you're just putting actively worse cards in your deck to make the Fable package happen.
Yeah. All right. Next here we have OTK Rune Chimera. This is a really fun deck. I've been playing this on and off a little bit. I haven't got as many games as I wanted on it as I'd like this weekend. Hopefully, I'll get a bunch of games in locally. The deck feels really consistent. The biggest struggle you will have is you have to memorize the order of cards and where your chimeras are. And if you're very good at memorization, then you can know where some of your key pieces are for like removal. And if you know you're going to pull it off of Daria, then you can go ahead and like rip that Daria, get a chimera and removal in the same turn, which is really nice. Like I said though, the biggest issue is the memorization. I lost the game when my opponent like healed to like something like 40 some health that entire game, and the reason I lost was because I misremembered where my second chimera was when I used my second Daria, and it was one card deeper than I thought it was, and I lost that game because of that. Otherwise, I could have actually closed that game out. So yeah, go ahead.
No, I think you really said that well. This is a deck that you really have to have the reps on. If you want to play this deck this set, you got to start grinding like right now, because you have to learn the lines. You have to really get good at the memorization and how to order your deck when you're doing things like Chain of Calling and what to get. I also think this is a deck that has like a lot of flex spots in how you build it because it's runes. So you get to play all these like one-off spells, and you have to kind of tailor your plan and your removal suite to what you're going to go up against. I think this deck at first might seem like a bit of a meme or like a fraudulent deck, but once you play with it, you realize it's actually really consistent. It's not an erratic deck that sometimes goes off. It's going to consistently turn 8 or 9. It's just how good are you at getting there and how good are you able to build your deck into the metagame. I could never place this too highly on the tier list just because I think this is a game that's so unpredictable that it's going to be hard to build the right list. I'm going to be a little aggressive and say I'd put this in tier 1.5.
That's exactly where I was going to put it. I think you hit everything on the nail there. I think one of the biggest strengths of the deck, too, outside of like the consistency, is that, like you mentioned, you can tailor the deck to your local meta or whatever you're expecting at the regional because you have so many different tools for removal in Rune itself. So if you can make a good read locally or at a regional level, and you come in with the right tools and still keep the combo, you'll do really, really well. But like I said, it kind of still comes down to sometimes memorization. If you're really good at that, you're gonna shine really hard with this deck. If if you're bad, you might want to either spend like time in the hyperbolic time chamber with this deck or move on to something else.
Yeah, I also I want to say one last thing about this deck, or two last things actually. I think what you said is at a regional, etc. This is a top cut killer because it's usually easier to predict what good players are going to play. Those like first 3 rounds, you could go up against anything. But once you narrow down, you can make a little bit better prediction. That's hard to do in this game. I just want to call that out. And the second thing I want to say is if you don't already own a lot of the rune cards, I actually think, I know this has nothing to do with power. This is actually like the worst dollar to power ratio that you could get, because between your Agnes's and your Merlins and all that, you have bought the entire price of like 2 other decks in this format. And I think that if you're going to commit to it, you got to be like really ready to play it, or just ready to play Rune.
Yeah, makes sense. All right, moving on to like what are we calling this? Like discard control abyss?
It's like Control Abyss, I guess.
Yeah, it still has the OTK package usually, but you're probably going for more discard stuff. Personally, I'm interested on what you think. I think discard right now is like in a pretty sweet spot. I don't think it's like maybe like the best deck or anything, but I think hitting into things like King Elephant, you're just like ripping out elephants from their hand, things like that, getting their hand size down is really good. Even against Egg Haven, like they don't lose their board anymore, so ripping stuff out of their hand still feels pretty good too. Prior to them egging, and just sometimes if you see an egg in their hand, you just rip it out of their hand, and then they can't clear your board in response, and you're just like you're chilling, It's good into discard dragon. I just feel like hand rip in general, depending on how, like if you're getting the executioners or if you're just playing, what is it? Isn't that called Nice Nature? I forget that one card's name. That last word, just discard a card.
Yeah, the Uma card.
Yeah. It really depends on what you're playing in the 3 slots. I've seen some lists go around. I probably would prefer Crazed Executioner in this meta, but maybe the loss of life is too big also, because we have a few burn decks here that do hurt pretty bad. Personally, I kind of feel like this is a tier 2 deck, but what do you think, Shepard?
Yeah, I'm kind of sold on tier 2 for this one. I think you made a lot of good points. I do want to say I think this is the worst of the control strategies. A lot of the control strategies in this format are really going to be warped around their matchup, and spoilers that these are good decks, into Egg Haven and Elephant Forest. And there's this interesting conflict between you have to be able to not just grind out, but gain life and defend against Egg. At the same time, you need to be able to go fast enough to beat decks like Ramp Dragon, which are going to pose a serious late game threat. My only problem with this is that it can do one or the other, but you can't really build your deck to do both. You kind of have to choose certain matchups and just forfeit them. And I think that's going to solidly keep this in tier 2.
Yeah, I agree across the board there. All right, we got Dirt Ruined. Unfortunately, I don't like this. Got like what, 1 or 2 extra cards this set?
Yeah, I actually played this. I actually tested this deck.
Tell me about it
then. The version that I tested was, if you followed along from our set review, I played the brick cards, just these like really heavy hitting things. So tested out the new 3/3 that becomes a 4/4 with Intimidate if you have Earthright, as well as Europa is another card you can just play in this deck. It's not necessarily involved with the synergy of Dirt, but Europa is just a powerhouse. The issue is that the Dirt package, like the payoff, has not really grown that much. You're still doing things with like Ancient Alchemist and Perseus and whatever else you want to throw in there. And I don't think it was really good enough last set. I don't think it's really good enough this set. And I think because of how much everything else is improved, Dirt's like in tier 3. I just don't want to really ever play that in an event.
I pretty much agree with you. I think one of the biggest issues with Dirt Rune is that it keeps getting some randomly good things, but the problem is it just has no way to close games out that are like solid and consistently good. A lot of times you're just stuck to was Ancient Alchemists or whatever this card is, right? It just feels like the reach it doesn't have the reach it feels like it should, and I think that's kind of apparent by if you're following the JP meta. Like Dirt Rune right now is insane because I feel like it got really good payoffs finally. Here we just don't have the good payoffs. We just have randomly good tools.
Yeah, it's a shame because like all of the mid-range payoffs that were around last set are still good. Like Remy and Raimi is still good. Now you have these new tools, and you're just playing this kind of like you're just playing a game that doesn't match up well into anything in the meta. I think where your Europas and your Rami and Ramis and all that are just going to get either blown out by eggs and con flags, or you're just going to die to elephant before you can burn them out. Like I think every single tool that they want to execute to win the game is going to be only effective against the other tier 3 decks.
Yeah. So you're thinking like above aggro best, I assume, or you think
Yeah,
it's
I would honestly put it in last tier. I
even
think
worse than Forest Fable?
yeah, because I think Cassiopeia and King Elephant are actually enough of a buff to Fable that it's going to keep it a little bit above dirt.
Fair. All right, next, Discard Dragon. This has been a terror in like all the past formats. Now it actually got some really good tools. The deck still might be like a slave to how you draw. If you draw well, draw the right answers at the right time. But like if you get the board set up, you get was it PDK, right? Is it on the board with your flute and stuff? Like, yeah, you end up taking a lot of slots, but you just do a lot of like incremental damage here and there. You control the board better, and you also got, I forget the name of the card, but that extra removal card now that goes to EXR when you discard it. That's like pretty huge. It lets you play Dragon Tamer a little bit more greedily, because now you have 9 cards that you can gladly discard and get some kind of advantage for instead of the 6 before, which is nice. Yeah, the deck just seems so good. I've only seen a couple. I haven't played it personally, but I've seen matches where Precious playing it. It just seems obnoxious sometimes. What are your thoughts, Shepard?
Yeah, I mean, I just was playing against it earlier. I think it's still really powerful. I think it was probably, if not Uma, it was between this and Uma, I think, for the best deck last set. And this set's only got better. I think it's called like Dragon Newt Fist, like you mentioned, is such a huge buff to the deck. I think PDK is like just a really good card because now you have more ways of kind of just uninteractively burning out your opponent. The only thing is, I think it is a little bit weak to the fact the meta is revolving around decks like Egg and Elephant. So you're going to see a lot of healing, a lot of things that are going to be able to fight back. And I think everybody else got powerful too. I would place this in tier 1.5. I might regret that later. I think it's solidly better than Chimera. But it's hard to say if you're talking about just power or showing up. I think a lot of people are going to play it. I think more people are going to play it than should play it, but I think it's going to be one of the most common decks.
Ooh, thinking it's gonna be one of the most common decks. I'm still split on what the dragon community is gonna end up on. But yeah, I think everything you said was correct. I do think it's personally, I kind of like Chimera more than Discard Dragon, but I totally see Discard Dragon being so obnoxious, especially in the right draw. It just feels insane sometimes.
Yeah, and I think the Dragon community just likes playing the deck, so you're going to see it a lot more. And it's funny. I think it is going to be played more, and I think overall it's probably on average a more powerful deck than Chimera. The downside is it's really draw dependent. You can get hit with really bad variants. You have really like you have to sequence things well after you have to like learn the sequences, but then also you can still just get screwed by certain draws, and that's something that's like not appealing to me. In set 3, you had the raw power to kind of fight through that variance, but as the raw power is less effective relative to the field, I think that variance is going to become more of a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the big issues I always struggle with Discard Dragon is some days I play it, I'm like, oh my god, I'm invincible. Other days I'm like, wow, this deck is like tier trash. It's just depending on the draw order, man.
Yeah.
All right. Next card here, not card, but next deck. This is more like a mid-range Abyss, right? Is that what we're kind of going for?
This is the Departed package.
Yeah.
Like where you're playing all the mill stuff, and then I forget what's the name of this card. It's the 7-drop that brings back 2 followers from your discard and gives them either +1 or +3/+3 based on your necro charge. This is kind of like an aggro / combo deck that just has these big haymakers between not just playing it on 7, but milling it early and then death pressing it out. You play the mummies so that when you bring them back, you can immediately storm your opponent. I think this is actually like way more solid than Abyss aggro, because I think it's just going to more consistently get you turns, like get you games where you just like slam the 7, bring stuff back. It's really sticky. It's annoying for your opponent to deal with. But the thing I really don't like about it is to play this package, you have to put a lot of cards that I'm not a fan of, like I think are below rated in the deck. You have to play the Amulet that mills you for 2. You play the
Yeah.
2-drop 2/3 that mills you for 2, and I just don't feel good about putting fighters into my deck.
Yeah, like the payoff for the deck doesn't seem like good enough to me. It's really nice. You have like a lot of good value plays in the deck. Like if you get a board clear, you just play this guy down, and now you have a built board again, essentially, which is nice. And like you said, you have access to Death's Breath, and you can cheat some things out, get really good value. But I never feel like the deck has any great payoff that I really care for, and it's just you hope to outvalue your opponent, but sometimes just outvaluing your opponent in this game is not good enough to win the game.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like just outvaluing. It kind of reminds me of Hero Sword, where you're like this aggro deck, but then once your turn 5+, you just keep rebuilding sticky boards, and you like make your opponent have to keep wiping, keep finding answers. My only problem with it is that this is a format where every deck, your 6s and 7s and 8s are so powerful on their own that I'm just worried that the work you have to do to make your 7-drop powerful is too much, right? Other decks are just going to
Mhm.
play Istravil. Other decks like Ramp Dragon is just going to play Istravil. Forest is just going to play King Elephant, right? Um, this deck has to do a lot of work to get there with its win con. Something I say all the time in Shadowverse. This is not a game where you can durdle. You have to win the game. You have to win the game. You have to win the game consistently. The cards you play need to do things, especially if they cost a lot of mana. This card does meet those criteria. My issue is just getting there is so much work compared to every other strategy.
It's one of those things too where you are forced to start warping your deck choices around certain cards, like the 7-drop, to make sure it's good enough, and then that kind of just hurts your deck in general as well, right?
Exactly. Like I don't think the Mummy is a particularly good card. Like I don't think you really want to play the Mummy, but you play the Mummy in this deck because it's on game plan and playing. And I think that's correct if you want to play this deck, but that's what I think makes the deck bad is that to play the deck on game plan, you have to play cards that are not effective outside of the synergy.
Yeah. So what are you thinking? Like tier two?
I like tier 2 or like maybe like right below Aegis in tier 3. It's really iffy for me.
It.
I think I'm gonna say tier 2 just because I think it does win the game, and you know, playing the 7-drop and doing a bunch of damage is gonna win enough games that this will top your locals. You'll die to it. It's just gonna happen.
Yeah. I kind of agree with that overall. I could totally see it being in tier 3 too, but I kind of want to give it the benefit of the doubt a little bit and throw it into tier 2, bottom of tier 2 that is. Next year though, we got our good boy here, Egg Haven. This deck got some really powerful tools, and by powerful tools I mean mostly a goblin that says I keep my board and you don't, which is more than enough to like completely change how good the deck is. It like I played against Shepherd here, and when I kept my board against Ramp Dragon on like turn 4 with an egg clearing the board and just still having everything, it was pretty obnoxious, and the game kind of just ended there from that point forward. Um, Andromeda is just such a good buff to the deck, and overall, other than that, like the deck is mostly the same. I mean, you can be spicy like myself and play Goblin Queen, which I think is really good in the deck. Other than that, I
Goblin
mean,
Princess.
or sorry, Goblin Princess, yes. But you have anything else to add to Egghaven?
Yeah, I would say that Andromeda is obviously the powerful synergy, but I think just having a goblin that you want in the deck is really good for your aggro deck.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's such an underrated part is that now you just get to go Goblin on one so many more games. I mean, you were already playing just the card Goblin before, and now it has a lot of juice later. I also think an underrated addition to the deck is what's the other new card that it plays? The 5-drop?
Oh, my brain is dying right
Odette.
now. Odette, yeah. Well,
Odette. I
Odette
think
was from last set, but it got much better this time around, right?
yeah, I think it's just so much better because you just keep building these sticky boards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and Andromeda helps you do that. Yeah, the game plan is just so effective. I think it's gonna warp. I think it's tier 1. I don't think it's the best deck, but I think it's the meta warping deck. I think a lot of people are gonna play it, and I think how you play into it and how you play into the decks that are trying to counter it is gonna define where you are on this tier list for me. Because I
Yeah,
do think it's gonna be really warping and popular.
I absolutely agree. Also, to add to like a lot of times you'll find a one of Dark Alice in the list for this, and uh thinking about it a lot more, I really, really like a one of Dark Alice. It adds extra reach. Andromeda plus Dark Alice means you got to keep your board, and they all get buff, and you swing in immediately. It it got. I think it just got the obviously Andromeda is busted, but it got just enough extra things on the side, and some stuff is already very powerful into this current meta. Like, yeah, this deck is just tier 1 easy.
I agree. I mean, you can play the one of Dark. You can play like the flex picks of like Dark Jan, Aether, Goblin Princess in different numbers. And I think you can't underestimate the fact that part of what makes this warp the meta is not only is it going to be popular, it's a deck that if you don't think about in your construction and your deck choice, you are going to get punished really hard. Like you always have to have this deck in mind when you're building and when you're making decisions of how you want to dedicate the different flex slots that you have.
Absolutely. All right. Well, on to the next monster of the format. I'll give the floor to you, Shepard. You are grinding this deck currently.
Yeah, I don't know anything about this deck. I guess it's pretty good. I wouldn't really play it. Bottom
Tier
of
3?
tier 3.
Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, I know he's teasing me. I've been practicing Forest for this set for almost like just a little bit under a month now in prep. I've tried like 100 different Forest builds, played it against everything. Egg. I think Forest is really, really powerful if you have the right list. I would put this solidly in tier 1. I think it's going to be not the best deck, but it's going to be another meta defining one where you have to have a game plan into it. What's going to make it weak is that I think it's a deck that you have to build correctly. I think it's similar to Sword last set, where people were showing up with these mid-range cards in their aggro Sword deck, and that significantly drops it on the tier list. I think when you show up, if your Elephant deck is on a ton of Beetle Warriors and Elf Songs and Fashionista Nelcha, I don't think it's a tier 1 deck. I think if you are playing a mid-range game plan similar to Silverbolt last set, just with some buffs of like Spring Green Protection and Sukuna, and you're only playing 1 to 2 cards a turn, you're drawing more cards off your Harvest Festival, then you're comboing out with Elephant, putting pressure on 6 into like a 1 of Silverbolt or something on 7. That's going to be super meta defining. That's why I would put this behind Egg though, is I don't think players are going to identify how to build it correctly, and I think the rest of us are going to get to benefit from that.
Oh, okay, I could see that. I'll put this behind Egg right now. I do think it's a very defining deck as well, because I think it kind of puts every other deck on the clock of like, all right, around this turn is when Elephant starts popping off, so you need to be like close to winning the game or winning the game. Otherwise, you're just gonna feel bad or have some kind of answer for Elephant when it comes down. Especially if you ever have to face a evoed Elephant. You better have something, because usually at that point you've lost the game. You're just like eating like 15 damage to the face or something, right?
Yeah, this deck puts your opponent on a 9-turn clock. Pretty much by turn 9, you're going to be consistently doing like 15 to 20 damage based on the game state. Your opponent has to do something to stop you from getting there, or to make you spend extra cards. Or in the case of some strategies like Ramp Dragon, they can heal out of the ranges of it. But part of what makes this deck so good is, as good as Elephant is on 9, if you play a 7/7 with Storm on turn 6, that is still a huge hassle. And your opponent has to not only worry about dying to it next turn, if it lives and evos, you just instantly win. Yeah, and I think an underrated enabler is Spring Green Protection. I've seen some people actually not running it or confused about what it's good for. Elephant is one way to win the game, but having Spring Green in your deck makes other cards better. Like it makes Tia better. It helps you get things out of range, but most importantly, allows you to make an Ancient Elf on turn 2 if you're going second into a 5/5. And you've just taken like 8% of your games and turned them into an almost auto win against some strategies. For the non-dragon decks, making the 5/5 on 2 against, for example, like Sword. Kit, we played some practice games earlier, and sadly I missed it. But I think if any one of those games, if I put down that 5/5 on 2, you're just never getting there.
Oh, absolutely. It's so obnoxious. I mean, it's kind of been true before, where like if Force is able to get a 5/5 on 3, essentially, because that's usually the soonest you can get it before, it was already obnoxious. So now if you get a high roll and get it a turn earlier, you probably win all of those games easy, unless you like have a heart attack and pass away right then. Yeah. But I think you hit everything right. I think also too, one thing to note is that Forest in general has like a lot of really good supplementary cards. So kind of like Rune in a way, if you know what you're going into, you can kind of change things around and play into the meta and still keep the all the benefits of like playing elephant, playing Silverbolt with elephant or whatever. That's at least how I feel when I look at like the total card pool of Forest.
Yeah, I totally agree. On Saturday, we went to the like opening little small local, and the list that I brought was on 3 Rose Deer and 1 Ivy Spellbomb. Just because I said, hey, I think I'm going to need to grind. I think I know I'm going to play against at least 1 Heal Haven, so I'm going to want these Rose Deers to try and like burn my opponent out. Let's say if I knew tomorrow I was going to an event where there was going to be a lot of Abyss aggro and Sword, well, suddenly my numbers change, and I want things like Flower Princess to be able to better address their like legions of duders.
Yeah, absolutely. If you know the meta, Forest can kind of warp its deck around and not hurt itself, and but just play to that advantage, which I really like.
And I think the advantage of it too is that you don't have to play to the meta that hard, right? You only ever change like 3 to 5 spots in your deck at a time, and then the other 37 cards are just an instant powerhouse in every game.
Absolutely. All right, moving on here to Ginger. This deck here, this is just like with the Fallen Angel package basically, and like playing Lucifers, things like that, just to cheat them out as well. I have not played this deck. I think you played it a little bit as like a meme.
I played it for like an entire day straight. It's a Runecraft deck that revolves around World Builder Ginger, which allows you to put stuff in play. You play like Fallen Angel cards, and you put Lucifers and Israfils into play, or the guy that steals your opponent's followers. Just like a goofy meme deck. But the worst part about it for me is I played it for like a whole day because I was like, oh, this would be so fun just to show up with a local and like be like, haha, look at my stupid deck. But it actually wasn't even powerful enough to do that. Like, I just think this deck is bad. I was surprised when it's on the tier list. I think this is the worst deck that anybody will sleep up in all of set 4.
I basically agree. I assume like even like if you're lucky, you get some crazy high roll stuff happening. Even those high rolls don't seem like amazing payoffs either. So like I'm pretty happy putting it basically the bottom of tier 3. I don't know if you think it's better than anything else here.
No way.
All right. Hero Sword. So, like Shepard said, we played a few matches right before we started this. I was playing Hero Sword. This has to be the premium aggro deck of the format. Like, if you want to play aggro, just play Hero Sword. There's nothing else worth playing. This deck is so fast. It's obnoxious. Like when you high roll, when you low roll, it's still consistent enough that you can squeeze out victories on turn 7 and 8. As long as you maximize the value of your cards and you just keep pressuring your opponent's life total, it makes it very hard for them to deal with your life total. So you can just say, yeah, my opponent's at 10. I'm going to swing in for 3 here, but they're going to spend their turn to remove my board and not really hurt my life total. And even if they put me down to like 15, you still feel like super good. Yeah, like the only issue you might run into is like maybe you run out of resources, but that's the big thing about the deck is if you can manage to maximize the value off of your was it not Mock Knights, the
Valiant Fencer.
Yeah, Valiant Fencer, Armoros, Spear Knight. If you maximize the values of those as well as the new card Mars, Flame General, I believe is the title. That card also helps a lot. The card is actually pretty like busted. No, I don't want to say busted, but it adds the extra consistency once you hit those higher play points, or even on 4. I really like playing at Evo, pay 1, bring out Quick Bladers, swing in for 2, and call it a day. And then they have to still get rid of it, otherwise the following turn after can be pretty obnoxious, like following up with the what is it? Not Valiant Fencer. My brain is shutting off. Floral Fencer is pretty silly too. You get a bunch of officers that way. They all get buff as well. Just playing Novice Troopers from hand, hitting the heroic entry with Mars on board, then hitting Mock Knight is obnoxious. It gets pretty silly once Mars is on the board and it sticks around for more than one turn. I really like the deck. I do think it's like top of tier 1.5. It might actually be tier 1 just because it's like the premium aggro deck of the format. But what are your thoughts?
It's funny. I think this is the deck that I've changed the most on in the last week. I think I was really expecting it to just not be good this format. I think in the set review, I talked about it like, oh yeah, it's like Sword is not going to be a serious threat. But then after playing with it more and playing against it more, the high roll is still just so powerful. Of when you get the high roll, there's a lot of force behind that. There is, unfortunately, I think the major downside of this deck, which is not even the low roll. It's just that this is like has even worse than an elephant problem. A lot of cards came out in set 4 that are going to bait players, and don't be one of them, into building this deck wrong. They gave you a lot more mid-range tools. There's a lot of sword mid-range tools that exist. This is not a mid-range deck. In fact, Kit and I'm sorry, we're going to drop the secret tech on them, Kit. We've been talking about building it where we're like cutting the 2-drops for more 1-drops with the addition of Perseus, etc., just to accelerate the game plan. I think you're right. I think this is the premier aggro deck. I don't know if I would put it above Discard Dragon, but I think it's going to be solidly in tier 1.5. I think you're going to see it in almost every top 8.
Yeah, especially in a team format. I mean, like, oh yeah. I personally think it's top of tier 1.5 because I think worst case scenario, you sit down and you go, yeah, I got a 50% chance to win this game.
Yeah, I do think that the longer the event is, the more rounds you play, the worse this deck is.
Yeah, possibly. You're right. I'll throw it below Discard Dragon. I'm totally cool with that. I do think it's if you are an aggro player, this is the deck you have to be playing. There's nothing else. It's just that simple.
I would consider. I mean, I don't know. Everybody says I consider Haven an aggro deck. I just think it's an aggro deck with a lot of longevity. But like your goal is get your opponent dead and burn them out.
Yeah, I agree. The biggest thing with Haven is like the first few turns are like you're playing aggro, and then you just pivot to burn to win the game. That's how I feel a lot of the times with the deck.
Yeah. I mean, some of the best games I've had on Haven last set and this set are when you go, Andromeda and then Faria, or just like some combination of getting 3 goblins in the first 2 turns. Your opponent just is groaning every time.
Absolutely. I think personally, if you're an aggro player though, I think sword is just fitting more for you because you're not playing spells, you're not doing anything fancy, you're just going like, here's my board of really big guys that keep coming back, deal with it, or otherwise I win the game.
That's true. This is still the, hey, my Vanguard friend is going to the Spring Fest and I have to hand him a deck for the team tournament. I'm just going to give him Hero Sword and tell him to get lucky.
True. All right, this next deck here is PDK. Like I think we're calling this PDK mid-range because I see people talking about that a little bit, though I haven't like looked into it too heavily. I mean, what about you, Shepard? Have you looked into that at all, or what do you think? What are you thinking?
I think deck is a strong word.
Yeah, deck is a strong word.
I think I don't know. I don't know what I'm missing. I don't think this deck comes together. Like, why are you not just playing this in the, like, you're putting the PDK suite in your deck, and then you're not playing the other half of the good cards, which are the discard cards.
Yeah. I pretty much agree. I mean, like, I think every other dragon deck is just straight up better than whatever this deck is trying to do. Because like you can play PDK in the other decks and still feel good for the most part. So I don't know. I think
this is tier 3. Like you're playing Dragon Rear or Matilda. Like
where we're dumping atrocious. It though. Above Fabled Forest or below?
Okay, so here's the thing. This deck still has 3 Fortes in it.
You're right, tier 2.
Like it has Dragon Oracle, it has Forte, it has Shenlong. I think it's actually like, I think it's there because Dragon has so many stupid cards that like you're gonna do it. I tier 3 is kind of hard to judge because you're like the granularity between like bad decks, but it's also hard because I'm like judging it really harshly because it's so much worse than everything else you could be playing, to the point that it's hard to compare it to other decks because I just look at it and I'm like, okay, you have half of this package. Just either play the full ramp deck or play the full discard deck with PDK. Like, I don't want to put bad cards. Like, I don't want to put Star Phoenixes and Dragon Summoners in my deck. I just don't like those cards. And if they're only good with PDK, then you have to draw one of your 3-ofs in order to make your bad cards good. And then you don't even get to do it for that much because you're constrained on mana. PDK costs a lot. Yeah, it's hard to kill, but it's not like it's impossible to kill. It's not like decks aren't going to consistently kill it in the 1 to 2 turns afterwards. So, yeah, I don't know. Forte's in it, tier 1. That's my final word.
Has 3 Fortes, move it into tier 1, boys. All right. I think this is going to be maybe after we talk about this. I'm not exactly sure where you're placing this, but I feel like no matter where we place this in the end, maybe this might be a controversial take, depending on what the community thinks. Because I haven't been really reading much on what people have been thought about this. But Ramp Dragon is, I think it's absolutely like, I don't want to say busted, but it's what is it is Waterworm, Symbol of the Waterworm is the card that I think made this deck infinitely stronger. The consistency it adds, the extra healing it adds. Still, though, I think one of the biggest issues is like it can maybe get aggroed out. We've like for like right before this, like Shepard said, we played a few games. You were on Ramp Dragon those games, right? And I mean, how do you feel about this deck? Because it just the extra ramp just gets you to the point where suddenly, like every turn, you just have bomb, bomb, bomb. Your opponent has to do something, otherwise they lose the game. Here's another Israfil back to back. It's so obnoxious once you get there. So
Yeah,
if you don't win before then, you kind of just lose.
I agree. I think this is probably the deck that our opinions and like our testing is going to lead us the furthest away from what the community thinks. I haven't followed too much of what the community is talking about right now, because I'm better than all of them. And if you disagree with that, you should write a long essay in the comments below, and give us engagement. But yeah, I think this is a tier 1 deck. I think it's really good. I think everything it got really pushed it over the edge. I think you have so much tech now between Sybil, Goblin Princesses, Israfil.
Oh, the eggs as well.
You get the Dragon Eggs. I mean, every game I've played against this deck, they basically start at 30 to 35 life, and that's really good into Egg Haven, and it's really good into Elephant. I think you're going to stumble a bit the same way that ramp strategies in every card game stall, like in a game that we played earlier where I mulliganed a pretty mid hand that maybe I could have kept, and I mulliganed into like 7-drop, 9-drop, 9-drop, 5-drop. And you're like, all right, I'm just going to lose this game. Like, that said, I think if you build it right, that's going to be a little bit rare. Those hands are mostly a problem against Hero Sword more than anything else, because some of those hands can still beat decks like Egg. I don't know if I don't think it's the best deck. I think it's probably number 2 or number 3. And I think it's going to be, I'm going to go on a limb and say, I think it's going to be underplayed. I think this is a deck that like the people that are in the know are going to just destroy with it, though. I think you're going to consistently see some of the same players in top 8s of everything.
Yeah, I basically agree across the board. I'm surprised that like you don't think it's the best deck in the format. What do you think? You think Egg's just better then, or?
I think actually we're in a kind of a rock paper scissorsy format a little bit. I don't know what we're not between those three, but not necessarily like a direct rock paper scissors between the top 3 decks. But I think it's actually just going to come down to the meta breakdown week to week and trying to predict it going into each event. I think if you build Egg or you build Forest correctly, if you build this deck, if you build Ramp Dragon, or if you build Forest correctly for your event, they're the best deck. I think if you just show up with Egg, you don't have to build around everything else. You can just be Egg, and that is a huge advantage in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So that's me to say I don't know, but I just think there's all solidly top 3.
Yeah, I can kind of agree. Maybe
I would do that just because, like I said, I think if you show up with the wrong elephant package, you're still an amazing deck. You just are going to have a couple of more awkward draws as you're ripping Ivy spell bombs into Heroic Sword, killing you.
Yeah, I think you bring up a very good point too about like Egg generally. Like there's a couple different builds floating around, the different cards you could be playing, but at the end of the day, you're still Egg, and most of the deck is basically already assigned to you at the start, and you get a few tech spots depending on what you want to play. So even if you kind of show up with not the correct tech stuff, you're still burning out your opponent. You're still being aggressive and like pushing for those games. I also think though, Ramp Dragon kind of has the same thing going for it. Honestly, like a lot of the stuff you play, it's just already been assigned to you. I don't know if there's even a lot of really crazy tech spots you really care to change out too often. You're still playing Conflag. Everyone has to play around the burn 5 to your entire board stuff for the rest of this meta just because Egg exists already. Maybe that's part of like hurting Dragon a little bit because now everyone's basically not only playing around Conflag, they're playing around Egg. But I feel like Ramp Dragon kind of has the same the same advantages as a Vega in that sense, though.
I mean, I do agree with you. I think it's a little bit more complicated just because Ramp Dragon's effectively a control deck, which means you have to both build and play so that your answers like line up well into what you're trying to do. I think that the other thing with Egg is its greatest strength is also its greatest weakness. Like you can show up and the deck is built for you and it's really powerful, but also every other player at that tournament um, is thinking about your deck when they show up, right? For that reason. And the
Yeah.
question is, can the raw power overcome people teching against you? The good news is that one, with Egg, it can, and two, I don't know what's up with this game. People, like a lot of players don't do that. Like a lot of players aren't actually doing the full work to tech their deck. So like this can help really get you through the Swiss.
Yeah. All right, I think we'll just leave it there. Next, we have D Shift here. Okay, listen, I have D Shift PTSD, so it's tier 1. But otherwise, in reality, Spell Chain, I don't know why, if you're going to play Spell Chain deck, just why don't you just play Chimera? I think it's better than D Shift right now. D Shift is still like a solid deck all around because, you know, who loves not taking an extra turn? You get an extra attack cycle essentially. The only issue I have is I think I've seen some people even like consider playing D Shift and Chimera, which I think is a mistake because the whole point of Chimera is you need Spell Chain 30, and if you play D Shift in that, suddenly you're taking 10 cards out or whatever to pay for your D Shift cost, which is kind of awkward and weird. I kind of feel like worst case scenarios is like bottom of tier 2 type of things because D Shift is still D Shift, but I could also easily see this in tier 3. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is when your friend has an automatic, but he pretends he drives manual and he D shifts, right?
Yeah.
I think D shift has been a deck that wins on like turn 7 or 8 for like 2 sets now, and it just has to get there. And I think the tools that it got last set and the tools that it got this set are actually really effective at getting it there. I think everything that helps make Chimera good helps make D shift good. Like I think Witch's Owl, I think that's the name of it.
Yeah.
The 1-drop.
The owl is so
That card
good.
is card's insane. And you get access to cards like Concentration that gain you life. My only problem with it is I think Chimera gets to be basically a deck of 37 cards that get you 34 cards that get you to the win state, and then 6 cards that are your win combo, right? Because it's your Darias and your Chimeras.
Yeah.
D shift has a lot more air in it. D shift has like anywhere from 1 to 3 D shifts, not anywhere from 3 of the Flame Destroyers. Sometimes you run a 1 of Chimera to clear the board. Sometimes you see a Mithril Golem. Like you just have all these things in your deck that are required for your game plan that make your draws more awkward, that don't line up the best. Like I think I would rather show up with Chimera, but the raw power is there. I think this is the top of tier 2.
Top of tier 2, well, maybe. My biggest concern here is that I think, yeah, D Shift is pretty solid all around. The issue though is not only are people like if you're going to play for a big board against D Shift, I feel like D Shift has issues just like blowing up boards that get too wide, especially once they hit 5 play points. But maybe I could be wrong here. That's just my feeling I've gotten from playing it and stuff. Whereas like every other deck above it just does not care because they can clear boards easily. Whereas I feel like D Shift is like, oh no, my forest opponent just went really wide and has like 2 5/5s on the board. Like I can't clear this. I'm just gonna take like 15 damage next turn and lose the game.
Yeah, I actually disagree with that. I think this is actually the first set that I've played where D shift feels like it's actually able to clear certain boards that were really awkward before, like double 5/5, just through a combination of it's the same way Chimera does it, just through a combination of the new 3-drops, Merlin, Agnes, etc. I mean, it's not going to clear every board perfectly every time, and that's its weakness, right? And that's I think Chimera and D shift can both clear a lot of difficult boards, but the problem with D shift is that you have so much like not gas in your deck that whereas Chimera is oftentimes going to be drawing drawing cards that are going to affect the board, D shift is going to be drawing sorcery cache, right? And that sorcery cache is not the removal spell that helps you clear the wide board.
Yeah. Yeah, I can still kind of see it. I kind of want to put it below this, but I mean, I could be convinced it could be top of tier 2.
I know we don't count JP meta for a lot, but
Mhm.
also D shift was really heavily played in Japan during the set, and it was like pretty successful from what I've seen.
Yeah, I do agree. I remember seeing that as well. Japan really likes D shift. That's that's one thing. People will show up to
It's
it all the time and try to force it to work no matter what meta.
I played D shift in digital for so long.
So did I, but also D shift costs 0, and I like taking 3 turns in a row instead of just one.
Yeah, and also spell boost was just such a better mechanic than spell chain.
Yeah, exactly. All right, we got the last. What is this? Awkward child of the family now, Uma. So this is the part where I think the traditional Uma deck just loses to a lot of stuff here in tier 1 easily, but does the Smart Falcon deck make up for that? Where, because Smart Falcon, unlike the tier 1 decks that can like clear boards of 5/5s, Smart Falcon can clear a board of anything over 5 health points pretty easily, especially if you have multiple amulets on the board to set it up and everything like that, which happens quite often. So I'm having a little trouble exactly placing this. Part of me is like, is this tier 2 now, or are we putting this in tier 1.5? I don't know if I would consider this tier 1. I mean, what do you think?
Okay, so I would say that this is going to be mostly conjecture and theory because I
Mhm.
haven't tested with or against Uma enough. It's funny, Uma is a deck that you haven't got access to more cards in a long time, right? In 2 sets. And it was just that good. It was just like the best deck, and it was the best deck last format, if not tied for the best deck. So what I'm looking at here is who got like new tools that put them above D shift. And I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't see like most of these decks. I don't, or not put them above D shift, put them above Uma. And I'm like, I don't think any of these decks got the tools that put them above Uma. Like maybe discard is better. Maybe Uma's right below discard because I just don't. It's actually so powerful. It just plays so many standing threats that you have to kill. It can threaten to storm you out. You can build it for value. I think the smart, like exactly what you said. I think Smart Falcon is still going to be really good in this meta game.
Yeah, I think one of the big takeaways moving into this is, like I said, there's just Egg Haven can deal 5 to the board, which gets rid of your Daiwa vodka. Conflag still exists for Dragon. Elephant can just kind of go, yeah, I just deal 8 to your face and call it a day and you're dead type of scenarios, and in as well. And then also, I mean, Forest also has just a lot of tools to like set you a turn back. Like even if you get your Daiwa bounced, it's just like it still feels bad. But if you start playing into the Smart Falcon stuff, I think it's more competitive than the old Daiwa combo stuff going on. I mean, Daiwa combo is still going to be really good. I agree with you though. I think it's kind of around here in general. I don't know if
Yeah,
anyone would even contest this or even say it's tier 1. But you know, I personally I haven't had a ton of games on the Smart Falcon deck, and it's mostly been theory talk as well as just like watching some videos and stuff on it.
I think
Um,
it's a real question for me. Like I said, this is all conjecture and theory craft because I haven't done the testing enough. Is how it's going to play into Egg. That's like the big question. Is what does that matchup look like now? Especially what does it look like when Egg can clear their board and Andromeda to keep its own board? I think that's a huge issue. Uma has always kind of struggled with wide boards, and between Odette and Andromeda, Egg getting to build a wide board and wipe their board, I think that could pose a really serious threat.
yeah, I think prior to this set 3, Uma was just better than Egg last set. You all you had to do was play some heal cards, and if you pressure your opponent enough and force them the egg, they lose their hand, they lose their board, and you're fine with that. I traded my turn for their turn, and they're left with nothing. And then you can just slowly grind them out and win the game that way. The only game I ever lost against Egg Haven as a Uma player last season, or I guess last set, was literally my opponent, once I forced them on like turn 4 or something to egg, their hand was literally like 3 other eggs, and then their explosions just like demolished me, and I was like, okay, well, that sucks. Luckily I played back. I played them again in top 8 and destroyed them because they didn't discard like 4 eggs.
Oh my
um,
god! Yeah, you got the run
I got
back.
the run back. I was so happy. But
I
yeah, like, yeah, go ahead.
I think also I know I talked about like flexibility. We were talking about the Smart Falcon version versus these other decks. The truth is the cards are so powerful. You can still kind of customize your Uma to like, if you need to beat Egg, well, you know what's really good against Egg? Healing for 5, right?
Yep.
You just have access to the tools you need. Will it drop off? I mean, the other thing is like popularity of how often this is going to appear in tournaments, right? Because even if a deck is bad, if like half the tournament brings it, its chances of like luck sacking it top 8 are high. It's always the question of how popular Uma is going to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I do think, because I know recently, I do feel the Smart Falcon build is going to show up a lot more in popularity, just because Dean topped with it, and then another player in Australia got first place with it. And I think a lot of other people have been testing. I know when we first dropped the list, a lot of people were like, "Oh my god, I never thought of actually playing Smart Falcon in just a straight Uma list," and they're quickly finding out how powerful it is, because like once you bounce back a couple squats, that Smart Falcon is pretty big, and then you just give it a little storm spell, you smack face. It gets out of range of a lot of removal. Where at the point unless you're playing against Forest, they're going to have to spend 2 to 3 cards to get rid of it.
And also, I think an important part of that too, and I agree. I think the Smart Falcon list is where like definitely my starting point is the tools that Forest needs to deal with Smart Falcon are also the tools they're going to need to use to deal with your things later, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they only have so many Rose Gardeners in the deck.
Yeah. All right. That kind of wraps up what our tier list looks like. Hopefully you guys like it. If you don't like it, give us a thumbs down. Tell us how garbage you are at the game in the comments below, because I love engagement, whether it's hate comments or comments where you guys are, loving us, so forth. But before we close this out, I guess, do you think it being a team format for this meta, essentially, do you think that changes your opinions on like how good a deck is? Because you can, in this type of meta, be like, yeah, I give up on Egghaven. Just hopefully 66% of the time, I just don't see it. Like, do you think that boosts any of the decks, in your opinion?
It's funny. I think last set it definitely changed the meta. I think last set it meant you could bring specific decks that you would never have otherwise. I think this format, my issue is that the top 3 decks for me are so much ahead of the ones below that if you're trying to like really go game theory optimal, it's not like last set where there was I think the first 2 were kind of generally agreed upon as discard and Uma by players that are good and respectable. And if you didn't think that, you should tell us in the comments below. But like this set, it's like, I think it's a very clearly defined top 3, and you should just bring those 3 decks.
All right. Yeah. I basically agree with you on that. All right, guys. Well, this is Kit and Shepard from the future. When we finished that recording, we realized we forgot 2 decks on the list we wanted to talk about, and then also after we slept on the or the tier list a bit, we decided we want to move some things around. I kind of already moved some of it around. I think we agreed on, which is like moving Aegis to like the bottom of tier 2 from tier 3. But I guess the first thing we'll do is just talk about these 2 decks that we didn't get to talk about. The first one on here is kind of like this Princess Sword mid-range-ish build. Did you want to talk about that, Shepard, a little bit, since you have experience playing against this? And I guess it involves Romeo and Juliet, right?
Yeah, so basically this is similar to, I mean, this is a deck that existed in set 3, and it honestly wasn't the worst deck, just pretty much nobody played it, that used, Rapunzel and Cinderella and some of the other princess cards. Now you can basically retune that mid-range package to just focus more on Romeo and Juliet, but you still have access to a lot of powerful cards like Feria, as well as, I'm forgetting the name of the princess spell.
Kiss is like Princess Kiss or something like that with the frog, right?
Yeah, which is actually a really powerful spell. The only problem is that you had to put it in the princess deck. It gets a buff because Juliet is a princess. So now instead of going all in on Cinderella, etc., you can play stuff like Saria to search Cinderella. You get to throw in Romeo. I sound like I think this deck is good. By the way, I don't think it's that good, but that's the dream. It's really, really reliant on drawing both Romeo and Juliet. One of the things that makes it more consistent is the ability to tutor those out, but still, you have some awkward draws. You are not really as good at being aggressive as Hero Sword. That said, the percentage of games that you get to do your thing are going to be pretty good. I'm a little conflicted if this is at the bottom of 2 or the top of 3. I'm gonna say in good conscience, I can't put it above a deck that has Forte and Dragon Oracle in it, just like point blank.
Yeah. What one? I guess one of the things to touch up on the deck, though, my assumption here is, you can tell me if I'm wrong, though. You do get to easily play like Leonidas and still have that as a win con, and you just have the really good mid range package stuff along with the Princess package. I think that's like the biggest appeal to the deck, right?
Yeah, I think it's just basically the best version of mid range sword that you can play. And then because it's a mid range deck, you can tune with all the numbers. Your win condition can be Leonidas. You can build it a little bit more aggro, a little bit more like long form. I think you still avoid some cards. Like I think Levin is still a Albert is still a trap, but um, yeah, it's flexible. It's just none of the flexibility takes you to a high power level.
Yeah. So you're thinking what? Right below
Probably
Dragon
below
here?
PDK. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think it is better than Abyss aggro just because I'm a little down on that deck. I don't think that the cards are good enough.
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with, especially with Abyss aggro. Every time I look at Abyss aggro, I'm like, why aren't we just playing Sword? All right. All right. This last deck here is the whole Fallen Angel package with Death's Breath and everything going on, and then you get some like bonuses from this new set. You want to talk about that, Shepard?
Yeah, so a lot of you might be thinking, hey, we covered like this Death Breath strategy before in the last part of the video. The difference here between this and the deck that runs the 7-drop to reanimate things and runs the mill cards is this is the Fallen Angel package. We went with Death Press as the icon to make it clear this is Abyss. But your overall strategy is that you're a control deck. You play a controlling game plan for the first 5 turns of the game, and then ideally, in the dream scenario on turn 6 or 7, you're Death Pressing your Israfil and then Evoing it, which is just a huge swing, impossible for most decks to deal with, wins you the game. And then as you get all of the pieces that get you there are on game plan, right? So you're playing Winged Inversion to discard your Lucifers and Israfils now. You're playing Angel of Darkness, right, to get your things going. What I really like about this deck is everything it does is really on game plan. It's really clean. The mill strategy involves putting a bunch of really underpowered cards in your deck. I'm not saying the Fallen Angel cards are broken, but I think they're a lot better than Fight. Like I would rather play Winged Inversion than a fighter that mills me for 2. And you also get the benefit of consistency because if you're discarding your Israfils and Lucifers as your primary way of putting them in the bin, you have complete control. If your goal is just to mill whatever you want to reanimate, now suddenly you're a slave to the top of your deck. I would say that I'm probably way higher on this deck than 99% of the people that have not played with it yet. I would put it above Abyss Control in tier 2.
I kind of agree with you, only because one, this deck did like a form of this deck existed in the last meta. It wasn't very popular. Some people tried playing it, and like when it got off, and it felt very strong. I think now with like these extra tools, and Israfil is just so ridiculous. Also, as such a great target to like control the board in games with. I think it just kind of shored this deck up a little bit more, and like you said, the consistency of the whole Fallen Angel package, being able to discard things you want to bring back anyway instead of having to hopefully mill it off the top of your deck, just adds so much to that. I think I definitely agree. It's probably a tier 2 deck. It's probably between somewhere here in my opinion. I do think D Shift is probably better. D Shift is such a solid deck, but yeah.
Yeah, I think D Shift is solidly above it. I will say I think it's the cutoff point. I think everything after Death's Breath Abyss is like the decks that I just don't have a lot of interest in even talking about or playing against that much, and everything it or above is where I kind of consider the actual meta players. I know that's basically say like, oh, there's another tier here, but that's the way it kind of feels to me, where the other Abyss lists in tier 2 as well as Aegis Control, their win cons come down late, right? Like to put an Aegis into play. What I really like about the Death's Breath deck is it is a control deck, but it's a control deck who puts their win con down on turn 6 at the earliest, and that feels really powerful because it means that you just have to control the game for 5 turns before you say, okay, here's my I win card. Obviously, not every game works like that, but it's a really low cost to get there. You play a lot of draw, and you have a lot of really good tools like Punk Devils and just the full suite of what the other Abyss control strategy plays, except you're not trying to win off of this like super late game Dark Alice Azazel combo that has some fragility to it. I mean, here you're still playing Azazel, but that's because it's just a one or two of that you're gonna like sneak out a win with sometimes. The main win con of the deck is, can your opponent beat an Isterfil? Most of the time, most decks, they're gonna fold to Isterfil.
Yeah, and on top of is talking about Azazel also. I mean, even in if you're not like trying to combo with that card, if you're doing anything with your cemetery and you're milling cards, like it is a lot of the time a 4-drop 6/6 that makes your opponent roundly discard a card. Who wouldn't want to play that in any deck, especially if it's you're being like a little bit like mid-rangey control deck? That's just a good card with on 4 mana. Like, why not, right? So that's why you easily see that card in that as well. It's just a good card all around.
I agree. Yeah, I think it does a good job of exactly. I mean, I would call it mostly a control deck, but it does a good job of what you typically want from a mid-range deck, where it's really good at slowing the game down against versus aggro, and it's really good at going under control. So that before you have these big haymakers, like you can be playing Isterfil, your Isterfil, before Ramp Dragon is playing their Isterfil.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, before we kind of close this out here, we'll just talk about some of the moves we want to do. I think we're both kind of in agreement. We want to move Aegis up to bottom of tier 2, right? Because this is honestly like, kind of like the cutoff between like you have to be this good to get on the ride, essentially, is what we kind of agreed on, right?
Yeah, I think after like talking about it a little more and thinking about it, we said that Aegis, when we put it in tier 3, nothing is going to go above it. And it's like, okay, if that's true, it's probably actually at the bottom of tier 2, right? It's really the gatekeeper. Aegis is going to beat all the nonsense, right? And it's going to say, hey, you have to be good enough against me to have the raw power to win at this game. I think everything below it doesn't, and I think everything above it does.
Yeah. And then was there any other changes you want to make beyond that?
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I think this is a pretty solid tier list. I would say it's hard to say compared to other metas so far, but I think this is actually the first one where there's a pretty close power level between, I would say, the top 5 decks, 5-6 decks in the format, which I'm really excited about.
Yeah, I agree. It seems like I kind of say this almost every meta, I feel like, but the game is pretty open on what you want to play, especially if our events are obviously team format for most of this meta outside of locals. Team formats just let you play a lot of things you can get away with, though maybe not as much as last meta, because we got some 3 big bads here in tier 1 right now. But even in that case, all the decks in tier 1.5 are like at any day of the week can take games off of the tier 1 decks. So
yeah, I agree. I also think this is a format that's really going to reward deck mastery. I think Shadowverse so far has been a game that really rewards deck hopping and fundamentals. But I think between Uma, D-Shift, Chimera, Elephant, Egg, and even the Abyss deck we just talked about, even Aegis, it's like those are decks that really are going to reward the players that put a lot of time into them and really dedicate themselves to them. And I think that's also something that's really positive for the game, is asking players like, hey, if you want to play Egg, you can't sleeve up Egg for the first time and go to a tournament the way you could with Set 1 Dragon. Because that deck has a lot of lines that you have to kind of flesh out, theory craft, practice, and then come back and do it week in, week out.
Absolutely. I hard agree on all of that. All right, that kind of sums up what we had to add to the video. I'm glad we were able to do this and notice we were missing those decks right before when I was uploading it last night. So I'll go ahead and get this together, and hopefully everyone who ends up watching this, they enjoyed this tier list and everything. Once again, as always, Shepard, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. And just remember that if you think that you are right and we are wrong, you have to comment below and say exactly why we're stupid.
Yeah, exactly. If you don't comment or anything, then clearly we were right all along, and it's that simple. All right. With that being said and everything, thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you made it this far, just like, comment, subscribe, all that funny business. We have channel memberships and all that jazz if you want to support us that way. Otherwise, we'll see you guys in our next video later.